Yeah, good morning, everyone. So, yesterday we learned about some basic attributes related to form. So, we started discussing about form element and form element. So, the form element, some attributes we are discussing. In attributes, we discussed about ID, name, and class. One more yesterday we discussed about what method. What are the form methods we are having? Two methods. We have get, another one post. What is the purpose of get? What is the purpose of get method? It is used for fetching data from server. Can we submit data to server on get? Yes. But what are the issues? When we submit data on get, where data is present? It is present in query string. In the URL, it is added as query string. What is the limit of query string? 2048 characters. And can we submit complex data? No. What is advantage of submitting on get? What is the advantage of submitting on get? We can cache. Caching the data. Caching is storing the data in temporary memory. What is the advantage of caching? What is the advantage of caching? One important word is that round trip. It will save round trips. The purpose of caching is to save what? Round trips. What is round trip? Round trip is connecting to and communicating with server every time when user requests. We should not communicate with server every time when requests. Right? These are the basic things. So when we submit data on post, where data is present? On post, where data is present? On post, data is present in the form body. Second. So data is in the form body when you submit it on post. Right? Now on get request, it is in query string. But what is the default method? Default method is get, right? These are the basic things you need to know. Once we know about method, another important attribute we have, that is action. Action is nothing but it defines the target where the form data, it defines the target where the form data is submitted. It defines the target where form data is submitted. Where form data is submitted. It is usually a server-side page. It is usually a server-side page. Server-side page like .jsp, .php, like .asp, .aspx, like this. Server-side pages will be there. So target indicates where to submit the data. Generally on post, data is submitted to server. In server where? That means server side, there must be some technology which can catch the data. From client side technology, you are submitting. Server side, there must be some technology which will catch. In the front end, we are using HTML. In backend, you can use your Java, which uses JSP. In backend, we can use PHP. we can backend, you can use Python. In the backend, we can use .NET. And those backend technologies will catch the data that you submit by using frontend. That means when you submit data to frontend, from frontend, you have to tell in the backend who should catch it. That means to which backend page we are submitting. What these backend pages will do is they collect the data coming from form and they interact. That is what actually we define by using action. That means usually this you will use when you are learning any server side technology. Here we cannot show because for that you need knowledge of server side. You can just use later when you learn a server side technology like JSP, PHP or .NET like that. We have a form method is post, and form action indicates the page.jsp or page.aspx or page.php like that. That means it defines the server side page where this data must be submitted. Whatever data you defined in the form, it is submitted to a server side page. And to which server side page it should be submitted, that is decided by action. So the form method and the form action are important. Form method defines on which request it should submit, and form action defines where it should submit. That is actually the action attribute. So this you can try once you know any server side technology. So you cannot practice this if you don't have any idea on any server side technology. This is the example actually. Let's open the page, our project here. So it is Flipkart. Yeah. And yesterday we designed a simple interface here, form. And the form method is post, and form will have an action. Action is some page.aspx or some JSP or PHP like that. Actually, this is a server side page that people design in server side technologies, which I told you like Java, .NET and all. So later it will be very important for you, because when you learn a server side technology, server side a page is waiting to collect data from you. From front end, you send data to this backend page, and this backend page will collect the data and insert into database, or it will do some manipulations on the data. For that, we need an option called as what? Action. That is important. Next, another attribute. This you cannot practice, just you should know about it. What is action? Next important, form have an option attribute called no validate. It have an attribute no validate. Another important attribute for form is no validate. So HTML5 have default validations. HTML5 have default validations. So which you can suppress, which you can disable or suppress, disable by using no validate attribute. That's important. Actually, HTML5 is having default validations. You can disable those default validations using no validate attribute. So while working with forms, that is another important one. Actually, I will show you here. We have a simple form designing. I will remove this. Default method is get. I'm just using the method. I'm asking here a data list with data term, some username. Data definition input type is text. Some reference I am giving name as username. And we have some button as submit. Don't worry about the design, you will learn later. Observe carefully. I'm just first explaining the information about form. Now here, without entering username, if I click submit, it will submit. I click on submit without entering name. It is submitting empty. That is not good. We should not allow to submit without entering name. Then we can put some validation. That means HTML have default validation. I given required. I given as required. This is a new validation. When we give validation without entering name, if I click submit, it shows a message, please fill out the field. That's good. That means it is not allowing to submit without entering the value. This is validation. So validation is good. That means having validation is very good, because if any wrong values are entered, then it will simply reject. We can put lot of validations, which I will tell you. We will discuss them. Validation is very good. So why to disable this? No validate means it will not validate. If validation is good, why you are disabling it? Validation is important. Validation is mandatory. Validation is very good. Then why you disable it? There is an option to disable it. That means, see now, I written some validation. And when I write form no validate, then what happens is it will not validate. It will allow to submit empty. If validation is good, why you are disabling? Why they have given an option to disable? Why they given validation and why they give an option for disabling it? Right? Actually, these kind of questions are very common. You may have a lot of overconfidence on your learning technologies, but in one topic, they can screw you in interviews. That means entire 1 hour interview, they can have on only small topic and you can't answer out of 195 questions. You may think that I am a Java developer, I know everything. But once you go to interviews, a small topic they will catch and on that they will screw you. And you can't answer because so many consequences will be there. You have to learn them. That means validation is very good. Then why they given disable of validation? You tell me, is validating good or not? Then why they given a disable option? Any idea? What do you think? Why they have given an option to disable validations? What do you think? Any? No? So why they given disable? The problem is they have given validation, but unfortunately some validations will not suit us. some validations will not suit us. For example, see, we are giving here some not username, we are giving email, and I am giving an email validation. Then here you see, now I am not using no validate. Now you can see here it is asking email. I entered some email, David something, and I click on submit. Is it a valid email? No. Then I click submit. It is saying please include @net. That's very good. That means it is verifying that you haven't entered proper email. Okay. I will enter @gm. Is it a valid email? But it will submit. That means email means only @net. That's not satisfying for us. That means it may be satisfying for certain occasions, but it is not good for us. Suppose there is a mobile validation, and by default it will validate Japanese mobile format. Why I need Japanese mobile format? We need Indian mobile format plus 9, 1, 10 digits. That means there are validations. Validations are good, but they do not suit us. In such case, what we do? We write our own validation. When we write our own validation with JavaScript, jQuery, we write our own validation. When we write our own validation, then two validations will work. One HTML validation is working. Our own validation is also working. When you are writing your own validation, you don't need any HTML validation. Then if a developer is writing his own validations, then he will disable the default validation because it is time waste, because 2 times it is verifying. It is verifying HTML, it is verifying your logic. That's not good. So if you are planning to write your own validations, then what to do? You disable the default validation. If you are satisfied with the default validation, carry on. If not, then write your own validation. And when you write your own validation, don't leave the default validation. We have to disable them. For that, they have given an option. What is that option? We have to write no validate. So this is a very important attribute. So syntactically, so we need to define form. Some form method is get, and form have no validate. That is an important concept about validation. How to validate a form, we will see later. In the next concept we are going to discuss. I am not giving any concept of inside form. I am just discussing the attributes of the form. Inside form we will see now. So what are the important attributes for a form? So important attributes for a form, we have ID, name, and class. These are used for references. We have method and action. We have another important one, no validate. No validate. While working with HTML, you need to just know about these attributes. Next important, so form is ready. We have a form and we know the attributes of the form. Now we need to learn form elements. We need to discuss the form elements. So inside form, how we can keep the elements. What a form contains, what are the elements inside the form, right? Just now you saw container. Container means where you keep all the elements. Inside the form, we keep all the elements. Now, what are the elements we can keep? So every typical HTML form comprises of various elements. Various elements like button, text box, check box, radio, list box, that is drop down, etc. So many will be there. Every typical HTML form comprises of various elements, and HTML provides different tokens. HTML provides different tokens for creating elements. Creating elements. Like we have input, like we have select, we have option, we have option group. So we have data list. So we have text area. We have like progress. So we have like meter. All these comes under elements, tokens. These are all the different tokens required for designing the form elements. So we have different tokens for designing the elements inside the form. We will see how to work with them. So there are elements like buttons, text box, check boxes and all. And to design them, you need these type of tokens. So many elements and properties you need to know. Let's see what they are actually. First, in the form elements, we need to keep one important note. So all elements must be inside form container. If elements are configured outside, they must be inside form container. If elements are configured outside form, then page cannot submit their data to server. That is the basic point you should know. Sometimes we design the elements without form because we don't want to submit to server. We want to handle some client-side interactions. If we want to handle client-side interactions, we don't design a form. Without a form, we define the elements and configure them. But if you want to submit any information to server, we have to make sure that the elements are kept inside the form. That is very important. I will show you that. Otherwise, it cannot submit. It cannot submit. Because, for example, see here, this some email or some username. This is text actually. Suppose I am having here. Now we will discuss how to design them. See here. What I am doing is I am having a page. I am having some username and other details. But see what I am doing now is I am removing that here. Yeah. You see this is kept inside form. Kept inside form, you see there is a form container. In the form container, we have all these controls. You may not see the form border, but there is a form inside that these elements are present. So I will remove the form. I am not using the form and I am keeping the elements. Still it looks same. But this time there is no form. But you can have elements without form. And when I type something inside and click on submit, it is not submitting. It is unable to submit. So page cannot submit the data to server if it is not present inside a form. It is mandatory to keep inside form. Without form also we design like this. So many times we do like this. Why? Because we want some client-side interactions. Client-side interactions means before submitting to server, we want some verifications. We want to check is his ID, name, passwords are correctly entered or not. So we don't want to submit to server. We want to handle some interactions client-side only. In that case, developer have an habit of writing the elements without form. But when you are learning your technologies like Java, .NET and all, 100% it is recommended to keep all the elements in a form. Because your main aim is to collect the data from user and use it. And data cannot be submitted to your technology if it is not defined in a form. So, but people who are working in different front-end technologies like React, Angular and other technologies, many times they have an habit of using the elements without form. Because their aim is not submitting to server, their aim is to handle some client-side interactions. So, both are important. So, it can be submitted only when it is inside which container? Form container. If it is not inside form container, it cannot submit. Let's put in form container. We will put a form. Inside that, we will put it. Now you can enter any name and you click on submit. It submits the data. If it is outside, you cannot. So that is important. So how to design the elements in the form, we will see now. What are the elements, how to design the elements. The first important element you should know is about text box element. First important element in the form elements is text box. How to design a text box? What are the various attributes for text box? Remember, in HTML, input element is used for various types of inputs. In HTML, we have an element called input, which is used for different types of inputs. Password inputs, Boolean inputs, string inputs, different. This one element can handle different inputs: string, number, Boolean, email, URL, date, time, everything. So actually, one input is enough for managing everybody. So you can see that. For example, see here, I am designing a form. Let's create a form. In this form, I will keep some register user. In this, I am creating some data list. And here I have data term. We learned list terms and definitions. And here I am using some user name. I want to allow to enter some username. Then we will use a simple input. That's it. Suppose I want age. I will put here a simple input. That's it. I want some address, and I will just keep here an input. So I want some email, and I will just use an input. One input is enough for everybody. And you can see that input is enough. It will display all this. So what people who don't know proper HTML think that input text is text box. Input type text is text box. But what you technically don't know is input itself is a text box. That means input itself is a text box. It allows to input any kind of value. But if you want to restrict to certain types, then you have to use some extra attributes. So any kind of value you can input by using which element? Input element. This one element can handle various types of inputs. It can handle different types, but we want for one situation, it should accept only number. In another situation, it should accept a boolean. Boolean is true, false, like that. In that case, we will use this input with various data types. So in those data types, one important type is what? Text box. Actually, what is the purpose of text box? Text box is used to handle a string input. So, and what is a string? String is a literal with a group of characters, which include alphabet, so number, and special characters, alphabet, number, and special characters. So string is a combination of alphabets, numbers, and special characters. It's a literal. A literal means group of characters. So to handle any string input, you can use text box. What is the point about text box is a text box allows to view, input, and edit a string. Text box allows to edit string, right? That is the point. What is the purpose of text box is it allows the user to view a string, it allows the user to input a string, and it allows the user to modify an existing string. If you want to display some string, if you want to input some string, if you want to modify some string, then it is defined by using what? Text box, right? By using text box. How we can make input as text box? So to make input as text box, you have to use the attribute. So we have to use the attribute type. To make input as text box, you have to use the attribute type. We need to use the attribute type. So we define like this. Input type is text box. This is HTML4 old style. So input type is equal to text. This is HTML5 style. HTML5. Both are okay. But in the modern, so we don't use any input type text box anymore. We just use input type text. So this indicates that it will accept only a string input. That means input is a string. So whatever you input, it will treat it as a string, right? So every input element is not by default text box. Every input element becomes a text box by using the type as text box or by using the type as text. In old versions, you will see people writing text box, but now you just need to write text. Input type text is enough. Now, what are the attributes for this text box? So many attributes are there. What are the attributes for text box? How you can make the text box more functional? Already we discussed what is an attribute. What is an attribute? An attribute defines additional behavior to element. When you define an element, it will have some behavior. And attributes are used to add more behavior. That means by using attributes, you can add more behavior, more functionality to particular element. The meaning of attribute is to add behavior, to add more functionality. So already we have an attribute type. We have so many attributes for text box. What are those attributes for text box? First, we have ID, we have name and class. These already we discussed. These are used for which purpose? Reference. So these are used to refer the element. Generally, we use these for referring the element later in CSS and JavaScript. Later in CSS and JavaScript, if we want to access this element and use it, for that we need a reference that is defined by using ID, name or class. What is difference between ID, name and class in CSS and JavaScript, you will learn. But here, one very, very important concept is every HTML element must have a name. It's mandatory. When you are designing a form, element must have a name. That is mandatory. You may ignore ID, you may ignore class, but you cannot ignore name. Because, why? Because form cannot submit the value of any element if name attribute is not defined. So it's mandatory that it should have a name. A form cannot submit the value of element if there is no name for element. So it is mandatory that every element must have a name. Every element must have a name. So you can ignore ID or class, but name is mandatory. Especially when you are designing forms for your technologies in the backend. There, your technologies cannot recognize the element if it is not having a name. So make sure that every element have a name. For example, see here. I will show the concept here. Suppose we are having username, input type. I defined as what? Text. Okay. Another term here is suppose city. This also input type text. They have to enter username and city. Let's put a button. Say register is button. As of now, temporarily use the button for submitting. Later we will learn about buttons. Separate buttons concept will be there. Temporarily just put a button for submitting. Now, do we have a form? Yes, we have a form now. Yes. What is the default method? Get method. Do we have name for elements in form? We don't have name for elements in form. There are no names now. Form have elements, but they don't have name. See now, I am giving name for username. Name is some username. Like this we define. Now observe carefully. I will go to the form. Here we have name and city. I entered some name. I entered some city. When I submitted the form, it submits both elements. But you see, only name is captured. City is not submitted. Why? Because this city element is not having a name. So is name mandatory? Name mandatory. If there is no name, form cannot submit its value. So make sure that when you design any element in a form, that element is having a reference name. It's mandatory that it should have a name. Suppose you give an ID or class, it doesn't matter. It cannot submit through ID and class. It can submit only through names. So if you are having name, so name is city. Now you can see that I'm entering the name and I am entering the city and click register. Now both are submitted. So a form cannot submit the value of any element if name is not defined. So make sure that every element have a name. That's very, very important. So we have input type is text, name is equal to some user name. So the attributes ID, name, class, these three are used for reference. IDs and classes you will use in JavaScript and CSS. Name is used in HTML to submit the value. So when you design a form in HTML, make sure that it is having a name. Next important, value. Value is nothing but, so it defines the default value to display in text box. It defines the default value to display in text box. What default value you want to display in text box? Because sometimes text box is not empty. Text box will come with some value. Suppose you opened a form and that form is edit account details. When you open edit account details, your account details what are already present, they are opened again. But this time you can make changes in them. That means it will open a text box. In the text box, already what is your detail, it will show. So that we can modify. So the default value, what you want to display in text box. Generally, text box is actually now empty. There is nothing. Then what you can do is you can put a value here. We can put a value here. I will put a value some John and you can see the default value is John. Can we modify this value? Yes, we can modify the value. I can change this and some name I defined and I can submit this. And you can see that it is submitted. After submitting, same form will load again. When same form loads again default value will be there. Usually what we do after submitting, we will go to another page. That navigation we design using JavaScript. So usually whatever value you want by default inside, that you can define by using an attribute called value. Can we modify this? Can we modify this value? Yes, right? If you don't want to modify, see, input type is text. So name is username and value is equal to some default value. You can keep any value. If you don't want anybody to modify that value, just they have to watch it. Then you can use an attribute read only. It will not allow to modify the value in text box. So, but it submits the value. So it will not allow to modify the value in text box, but it submits the value. It will not allow to make any change. Once the value is given, it is fixed. You cannot change. Because you see, you have registered an account in some Gmail. or you have registered an account in some bank application. They will give you user ID and they will give you password and they will give you other details like your email, mobile number and all. Now, out of all the details, which detail you cannot change? Out of all these details, which detail you can never change? IDs you can never change. Once the ID is given to you, it is fixed. You cannot change it. You can change your passwords. You can change your mobile or email addresses, but you can never change ID. ID finish. Once you take an ID, it is permanent. Few years back, we don't have a facility to delete IDs. Now they are giving that. Now they are giving the facility of deleting ID because now lot of memory is in use. Early days, we don't have an option of deleting IDs. We just leave it and create some other ID. If we don't want an ID, we leave it and create some other ID. They will check 1 year, 2 year, there are no activities, then they will remove automatically. But these days, they have given a facility of deleting the IDs. But you can never change IDs. That means some details we need to show which they cannot change, but they can view, but they can submit. Then what you do is you just put an attribute here. Currently, it can be modified. We can modify. We don't want to modify, then just put read only. When we put read only, then the value present inside this cannot be modified now. I can't modify. There is no chance of changing this value. It's fixed. Every time it will submit the same value. You cannot modify. I'm trying to delete or cut. Not possible. And I am entering some city and I click on submit. It is submitted. It is submitted. The value is there. You cannot modify, but it can be submitted. So we don't want users to modify the values. Just they need to see the values. In that case, we can just use read only. So you have to just define input type text. Name is some username and some value is some John. And we just put read only. There is another option. We can use disabled also. We can put another attribute disabled. What is disabled and read only difference is disabled also will not allow to change. It will not allow to modify the value in text box. Then what is difference between read only and disable? Read only also will not allow to change. Disabled also will not allow to change. But additionally, it will not submit the value. It will not submit the value. Read only can submit the value, but this will not submit the value. That means we don't want to modify and we don't want to submit. We want to just show. That means user can just see what is it. He cannot modify or he cannot even submit. What is read only? Read only will not allow to modify, but it allows to submit. Disabled is not allowing to submit also. That means now you just make it as, instead of read only, I'm giving disabled. I'm giving disabled. When I'm giving disabled, you can see that it is disabled now. You can see on the screen it is disabled. Disabled means I can't do any modification. I can't do any modification. I can enter city and I submit. Now you see, this is not even submitted. Only city is submitted. That means user can see the details, but those details are never modified and never submitted. Sometimes we want to submit, but don't allow to modify. In that case, we keep what? Read only. What is difference between read only and disabled? Read only can submit and disabled cannot submit. So Input type is text. So name is some username and value is some value, and you just keep disabled. So that is another important attribute. So read only and disable are used regularly with elements. So we have a lot of attributes here: ID, name, class, value, read only, disable. Another important in the attributes, we have size. It defines the width for text box. The default width is 20. The default width is 20. It defines width for text box. It is not limit for text box. Width for text box. We can define the width for text box. The default width is 20 for text box actually. So generally, suppose we have a username. I will remove this disabled and value now. Okay. We have username, we have city, and we have PIN. So, or you say some OTP, something. And we have a text box. Input type is equal to text and name is what? OTP. And for OTP, I don't want this much lengthy text box. Then just what you do is, for that we can put size as 4. Then you can see size 4 is like this. This is a small text box. And important, that's just only width, not limit. That means it doesn't mean that it will allow 4. It is just only width. You can type any number of characters inside. You can type anything inside. It is not limit. It is only size. What is the default size? Suppose I given the size as 20. Then what happens? It will be default size. If I given more, suppose 40 or 50, then it will be large text box. Suppose you are taking some comments or taking something else lengthy, then you can increase the size of text box. What is the default size of text box? Default size of text box is what? 20. Right? You can change the size of text box. That's what you can define. Input type is text. Some name is OTP. And size is some 4 or 5 or 6 something. So that is size for text box. Next important in the text box attribute, we have placeholder. Placeholder. It defines the watermark text to display in text box. It defines the watermark text to display in text box. Generally, when you are designing some text boxes, sometimes we want some tips to display. That please enter only 4 characters, or we say please enter starting with this. We want to show some tips before they enter any value. Usually we can do that by using a placeholder. That means what you do here, I'm configuring here for the text box. I will keep here. So placeholder. The placeholder is name max 10 characters. Like this I am giving. It is not setting limit. It is just only tip. And you can see here, it shows a placeholder inside it. And this placeholder is watermark text. That means it is not going to submit this line. It is just only tip. If you enter any value into it, that is gone. If you are not entering any value, then it is displaying the placeholder. When value is there, it is not displayed. When value is there, it is not. And important, is it submitted? It is not submitted. This is just a tip. Right? Many times we use these placeholders to alert the user what he need to type inside it. Right? Before he enter anything, we show them in a placeholder. Sometimes we use them even to save the screen space. Why? Because user have to enter username, password. Then you don't need to write these labels. Username, text box, OTP, text box. Generally what people do is directly, suppose I will show you some designs, like directly they put input type is text, and in that placeholder we put username. And you have, suppose temporarily I'm giving input type again text, and this placeholder is some password, something like this, and they just put a button as what? Login. These placeholders are used for saving lot of screen space. That means now what is advantage is I don't need any label again. I don't need to write username separately. Just in the box itself, we will say that this is username, this is password. For these kind of things, these placeholders are very important, right? So you can just display some watermark text like that. Input type is text, name is some username, and placeholder, and we just define name required like this. Any message we can display inside it. That is placeholder. So in the elements attributes, we have another important attribute, autofocus. Autofocus. Another important attribute is autofocus. Autofocus is nothing but it sets focus to the element automatically on page load. On page load, it sets focus to that element automatically. So generally, while designing forms, setting a focus is important, because generally what happens later is you are designing a form, some registration form. In that registration form, some 10-15 fields are there. User is filling all the fields and submitting. And when submitting, he submitted some wrong value. And again, the form come back. And sometimes what they do is, where the wrong value is there, that they will highlight. Not only highlighting, directly cursor goes there. And they say that you do modification here. That means above there are so many elements, but focus is on the element where error is present. We can shift focus from one element to another element by using JavaScript. By using JavaScript, we shift focus. But by default, we can set focus. For example, see, suppose you have the details like this. So we have a data list with data term, some name. And data definition, we are having input type is what? Text. Another data term, we have age. And data definition, input type is text. Suppose we are having another data term, some email. And data definition, some input type is email. Now, text I will give here. So many elements are there in the form. Now, what happens is, generally, many times you might have experienced the problem after opening the form. Now, I will start typing. Then I will start typing, and it is not typing anything. Why it is not typing anything? Because it is not typing anything because to start typing, you need to click in any element. Sometimes we forget that. And we start typing and we will see that nothing is typing there. Then what we do, we have to go and click inside the text box. That is called focus actually. When you click, that is focus. What I want is when page opens, I want focus automatically. Then you can set focus to any element. Suppose I want age autofocus. I will set autofocus to age. Automatically when page opens, age is focus. We can set autofocus to only one element. Suppose I set autofocus to email also. Autofocus to email also. Focus. Then out of these two, only the first one will be there. That means you set autofocus to all, it will be only for first one. So autofocus is not given for all, it is given only for one. And which one is autofocus? And their cursor will be blinking, so that user can directly start entering the value and typing the value. So you can set focus to any element. So input type is text, and some name is equal to username, and set auto focus. It is used to set focus to that element. So if autofocus is defined for multiple elements, it will always work only for the first element, because it uses a mechanism called FIFO. You know it, right? First in, first out mechanism. That is the mechanism. First in, first out. That means what is the first value you defined as autofocus, that will be in focus, not others, right? So this is autofocus. Next important, we have min length. It validates the minimum number of characters in text box. It validates the minimum number of characters in text box. It validates the minimum number of characters in text box. So the minimum number of characters in text box are configured by using this. It's a validation. Actually, suppose I am asking for some characters, means suppose let's say we are asking for name. So name min length I am defining as 4. And we will put a placeholder, name minimum 4 characters. I am typing that. Now I am refreshing this here. I am trying to submit this now. That means you should have a name. Make sure that it is having a name. Name is what? Username. That is the username we configured. Now we are entering the details, right? So we are entering some details here. Like see, I am entering some div and click on submit. Then it is not allowing to submit. It validates. That means it verifies that there are no 4 characters. That means it will say that please lengthen the text to how many characters? 4. Because the validation is set for 4. You entered minimum 4 characters, then it is fine. Minimum 4 characters, it submits. Anything less, it will not allow to submit. That you can validate by using min length. So it is a validation. Input type is equal to text. So name is username, and min length is equal to how many? 4. Similarly, we have another important, max length. It restricts the maximum number of characters in text box. It restricts the maximum number of characters in text box. What is difference between validation and restriction? For min length, I written as it validates. But for max length, I haven't written it validates. I written as it restricts. What is difference between validation and restriction? No? What is difference between validation and restriction? Yeah, you people, you have any problem? No. Is it boring? No. Your faces look like boring. No. Interesting only a topic. Then don't watch your mobiles. Okay, na? Because in mobiles I will not come. Eh? If you have to watch mobile, you don't need to come to class. Right? Sit at home, 24 hours watch. Right? Don't waste my time. 5 seconds I wasted on you. I should have continued. Topic should have finished. Don't waste my time. Don't come to class if you have to see a mobile. Okay, na? Right? Stay at home, 24 hours watch. I don't care. Right? Don't waste my time here. Okay, na? It's very precious time. My time is. Okay. So what is difference between validation and restriction? Any idea? Both are same. Huh? Then what is difference between validation and restriction? Huh? Restriction is warning. Good. Actually, difference between validation and restriction is, so if I say min length 4, can I enter 5 characters? Yes, I can enter. I can enter 10 characters also. Am I right? That means you can enter 10 characters also, but its rule is 4. That means it is allowing to enter anything. It is allowing to enter anything, but it verifies minimum 4. That is called validation. Restriction means it will not allow to enter more than that. When you put restriction, there is no need of validation. Right? When you put restriction, there is no need of validation. If I say max 10, that means it will be maximum 10. You can't type more than that. Then you don't need a validation. That's finished. That means, for example, here we are defining. So min length is how much? Min length is 4 and max length I given as 10. That means you see, can I type more than 4? Yes, we can type more than 4. Can I type more than 10? We cannot type. You see now, I start type characters. It will stop at 10. It is not going more than 10. Do I need a message now? I don't need message. Just put alert saying that in this box you can enter only maximum how many characters? 10. Right? Only 10 characters you can enter, not more than that. This is called restriction. Max length is not validation. Max length is restriction. So you cannot enter more than 10 characters. Right? Min length is not restriction. Min length is validation. So that means you can enter more than 4, 5, 6, 7. You can enter 2, 3, 4. You can enter 2 characters also. But it will validate up to how many? 4. That is the difference between validation and restriction. So restriction will not allow to enter more than that. That means you can just define input type is equal to text. Name is equal to username. So min length is equal to 4. Max length is equal to 10. That is important. So validation allows to enter any value, but sets rules for value. Restriction will not allow anything other than specified. It doesn't require validation. It doesn't require validation. Validation allows to enter any value. It allows to enter any value, but sets rules for that value. If rules are not matching, it will not allow to submit. So restriction will not allow to type anything other than what you mentioned. What you mentioned, it must be there. So here we don't need a validation because restriction will not allow that. Suppose I said age cannot be more than 15. Then it will not allow to type 16. Then why you need validation? That means it will allow to type only up to 15. It will not allow to type 16 at all. If it is not allowing to type more than that, then you don't need a validation. That is the difference here. So we have min length, another one max. Another important attribute required. So it is used to ensure that text box is having a value. It is used to ensure that text box is having a value. It will not allow to submit a value. It will not allow to submit a value. Submit a blank value, sorry. It will not allow to submit a blank value. Because generally blank is also a value. You saw ampersand NBSP now. That is blank space. So that means it makes sure that text box is having a value. Without value, it will not allow to submit. That means, for example, I given min length, max length. Okay. It is verifying minimum and maximum length to enter. But when I click on login without entering anything, it will submit. Without entering anything, when I click, it is submitting username. I don't want it to submit anything. So if there is a value, then submit. Then we can put another validation here. What is that validation required? When I put required validation, and you can see that when I click login without entering a value, it says please fill out the field. That means it will not allow to submit. So if there now second validation will work when I am typing. It says that second validation is what minimum how many characters are required for the second validation. First priority always for required. Because in some recent interviews, they asked these kind of questions which people confuse little bit. That means they ask like, if I return min length, max length and required, which one will be first? Means all are validations only. Which validation is first? Required is first. First it will verify required. After that, other validations, min length, max length like validation. So required is always first to verify. So once you define, now it is okay. You can submit the value and display. That is a simple option, right? We can give required. This is input type is text and name is username. And here we define as what required. Like this. Another important point is, another important option is, we have another attribute is list. It is used to display a data list as auto complete text. It is used to display a data list as auto complete text. It is used to display a data list as auto complete text. What is that? I will show you. And important, data list is configured using following elements. We have elements. One is data list element we need an option element. These two are required. To configure a data list, we need these things. Remember, this is all the modern HTML. Many people who know HTML don't know all this, right? Because the new HTML is very advanced, and in all advanced technologies like Angular, React, Vue, these type of HTML things are used. So because many people who know HTML, they say that I don't know what is list, right? I don't know what is pattern, which we will see that, right? So, but in the modern advanced technologies, people are learning, they have to know all these things because these are very familiarly used everywhere. List is one thing. For example, see here, list is, I click inside the text box, a list is coming. I clicked inside the text box, some list is coming. Can you tell from where this is coming? This is coming from history. That means actually in my browsing history, some previous details I entered, they are stored and they are coming. Are these permanent? They are not permanent. How to delete them? Here they give a delete button for deleting, or you can clear history. Once you clean history, this data is gone. Because when you delete history, there will be an option called, do you want to delete autofill text? That means when you go to history here, so go to the settings, history, and you want to delete the history. And in delete history, there will be option browsing history, and there will be options here. You see autofill data. Autofill form data is nothing but, so previously whatever data you filled in forms, those are saved and they are recommended to you. Browsers safely these days, what they do is passwords or OTPs or something else, secured data, PIN numbers, they don't show suggestion. For them, they disable automatically. So, but remember, the point is, this is not a permanent list. This is the list temporary coming based on your browsing history. But we can put a permanent list. Even you clean the history, it will be there. That means we can put a permanent list, because generally people are searching for some topics. When people are searching from topics, we bring the topics information from our database and we will show. And that is permanent. Even the clean history, they will be there. So such things we can define by using data list. For example, see now, I'm creating here a heading, some Google. I kept some input type as text. And here I will use some name as term. Say search term, I'm using search term. Okay. And here align for the form I given as center, and below here size I given as 40, and put a paragraph and a button and say search, something like this. Now I just designed a screen like this. Now what we want to do here is when user is typing something inside, I need to show him some suggestions. While typing itself, it should show some suggestions based on what he is typing. Then usually below this text box, we can add a data list. This data list will have options. Data list will have options. In options, you type what you want. For example, first option is JavaScript tutorial. So second option is option. Yeah. So option is some CSS examples. So another option is JavaScript project. So here we have another option is HTML examples. And we have another option HTML projects. And we have another option like HTML tutorial. Like this we are having. Another option like CSS tutorial. So many are there. Now like this, in a page there can be so many data lists. In a page there can be so many data lists like that. Then every data list needs a unique ID. We need an ID. ID as I will give some terms. Terms is an ID. Now this text box have to use this data list. The text box have to use this data list. Then text box will use an attribute called list. And list is coming from which data list? Terms. That is simple ID difference. This is not a link. So we are not using any hash. Hash is for navigation. It is not for navigation. It is to logical link. Logical link just requires an ID name, not a hash. Right? That means logically the text box is now linked with what? Data list. And see what happens now. When you see that, when I go here, a drop down like will come. This is not drop down. This is text box because drop down is different. Drop down will not allow to type. It will allow to only choose. But this will allow, you see all details it will show. Not only that, you click inside and start typing tutorial. All tutorial list will come. So here you are typing like CSS. All CSS will come. You are typing like here project. All project will come. You can choose from there. This is a data list attached to a text box. And this is not history. You delete history, it will be there permanently. Actually, in future, what you do is from your database, you bring those details and display them. According to what words user is searching, we use an API request, get the data and display that. So this is what we call as data list, right? This is an example for data list. So data list is designed first, and this data list is attached to the text box by using which attribute? List. So here it should be like this. Input type is text, name is some search, and the list is equal to terms. And these terms are designed by using what? Data list. Data list ID is what? Terms. In the data list, you can have option, some 1. We can have option like 2. You can put anything. Just I am giving option. So we are keeping an option like this and data list. So whenever user tries to click inside the text box and type something, it will show alert. It will show a menu. From menu, user can see what are present and he can choose. So this is data list, how you configure a data list. Remember, you are just learning only one element now. You are still in only one element. What is that element? Text box. These are all the attributes of text box. And still not done. Text box, this example I will give. I will copy this example. This is the example for text box. Now we have another very major attribute that is pattern. This is a very big concept which you need in future, any technology everywhere. For validations, this plays the key role in JavaScript, in Angular, in React, everywhere. These patterns are very important. Patterns means you cannot imagine a form without pattern. Patterns are nothing but they say that your password must have at least one uppercase letter. How do you verify that? That is done with patterns. How you verify that password is having one uppercase letter or special character? They will say that it is a strong password, it is a weak password, you need to enter this. How we verify? That is done by using patterns. That is very, very important for validations. This we will see in the next session. Tomorrow. And tomorrow entire session will be on this topic only. Because this is the huge concept. And without this, you can't move work in JavaScript or anywhere. And remember in JavaScript, JavaScript, Angular, React, everywhere you will use it. There they will not teach again. You learn in HTML, you use everywhere. Right? So in HTML, we will learn complete, end to end, everything about it. Then we can use it everywhere. Tomorrow, entire session will be working on patterns. Right? Tomorrow will continue. Right?